Hi there. I'm about to start my talk for the ML hardware session. And my talk is today on machine learning benchmarks for scientific applications. And I'm Tony Hay, and I come from the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, and I'm very happy to be at ISC this year. So we're talking about the contributions for benchmarking machine learning on science applications, and it's from the Scientific Machine Learning Group at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, and I've listed the names of the people. Jayan Thiyagalingam is the group leader. So this is the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, and you'll see that it's similar to US Department of Energy laboratories or places in Europe also. It has a neutron source, it has a synchrotron diamond light source, and it has a central laser facility with big and small lasers. We also have an electron microscopy facility, and all these facilities produce huge data sets, which are getting larger because the detectors are getting better and the bandwidths and the beam intensity is increasing. So scientists are getting literally deluged in data. We live in the scientific computing department, which is marked with LHC Tier 1 computing. That's where the big data sets from CERN, from the Large Hadron Collider experiments come. And we also have an environmental data center there on a super data cluster called Jasmine, which has some interesting architectural features. So it's a data intensive cluster, specifically designed for accessing large data sets as well as doing processing. So this is what the group does. We have three focus areas. One is primarily AI for science, if you like, use of AI in science to understand the results from facilities and understand it and make better, make it more efficient, make it easier to get scientific discoveries. And so that's using the facilities data to do that. It's not just the final analysis, it's also all along the pipeline. You can put AI and machine learning algorithms to improve and improve the whole pipeline of getting data from the target in the beam to actually doing the data analysis at the end of the day. We also have facilities projects where we're looking at the failure rate, for example, in facilities in the neutron source and also in the laser facilities, so that we're seeing if we can use machine learning to predict machine failures, to improve the efficiency of generating the beam, improve the efficiency of identifying and mitigating damage to lenses and things like that. So a number of areas we're looking at in the facilities. And the one I'm talking about today, on this slide, we've called Research to Advance AI. So this is using scientific applications to improve our AI and machine learning algorithms. So can you actually, for example, in your deep neural networks, can you include physical constraints from physics laws, chemistry laws, or whatever? Can you include that, and can you make it more transparent? Can you make it more understandable? Can you make them more robust? And how do you do that? You need to have some measurement scales. And so that's why I'm talking about benchmarks today. So these are the scientific machine learning group areas. And these are just some of the shots of the sort of things we have. In cryo-electron microscopy, up on the top left of my screen, you see you can now use the electron microscope to actually put together large numbers of faint images to construct a really high resolution image of the protein structure, for example. Human membrane proteins are difficult to crystallize. You can't use them in synchrotrons, but you can with a technique here, and that was what one of the Nobel Prizes recently was awarded for cryo-electron microscopy for biology. But you can also use materials too. We have something on cell migration, which is actually tracking segmentations of images and how they move with time. Denoising electron microscopy data. On the left, you see inelastic scattering data. Can you make sense of rather complex magnetic scattering in this case? And the one I'll talk about in detail is the cloud masking. Can you determine clouds from smoke, from reflections from the sea, from ice and whatever? It's not so easy to do, and can you do better than the traditional methods? So that's the sort of landscape. We have a large landscape. The facilities have over 3,000 users, so we have plenty of users to work with and beamline scientists, and we're doing collaborations with them. This is what we're doing on smart facilities. Just a couple of examples. On the left is data-driven control of X-ray tomography. On the right, we're trying to determine gamma rays from neutrons, from the pulse shape. And down at the bottom, we're looking at damages in the optics in the central laser facility. Can we actually mitigate those? So those are three examples, and there are other ones that we are looking at as well. But today I'm talking about research to advance AI, scientific machine learning benchmarks. And the problem there is there are many machine learning methods. The traditional one with deep learning networks was supervised learning, starting with ImageNet, as you know, and all these things. And you can do regression, you can do classification. There are various things you can do with that. Unsupervised learning is much more difficult, and clustering and other techniques are used in that case. And then there's reinforcement learning in other areas. So lots of different methods suitable for different things. But in the case of supervised learning, the challenge for the experiments is that when the data comes off the machines, off the targets, whatever, they're not labeled. And so you don't have a labeled training data set. And so you have to figure out, do you label somebody hand, or do you actually try and use a Monte Carlo? There are various challenges there. And then there are many different hardware platforms, just to a list of some. Obviously, we're looking at, not at all of them, but we're looking which actually have new properties. And again, finally, there's a whole range of scientific domains. We can't cover everything, but we are trying to give examples that scientists can look at and understand that that might be relevant for them, even though they don't have a PhD in particle physics or whatever. They can understand the challenge and see if it's relevant to them. And since we will also be giving a reference implementation, they can actually see what they can do, and can they do better with a different implementation. So this is the coverage. We're starting with material sciences, environmental sciences. Particle physics and astronomy are already doing lots of things, experimenting with these machine learning methods. And then there's the life sciences, like I showed you with the human membrane proteins in cryo-electron microscopy. What are the benefits to science? Why are we doing all this? Well, having, just as we found in ImageNet for the computer vision community, having a baseline performance on a given problem is a very useful target for other groups to aim at, for the scientists to aim at. They can see, well, can we do better than that? What's causing it? Can we put some more constraints in, and so on? So having a baseline performance is a very useful focus for people to work with. And we hope it will encourage the community and ourselves to see if we can see what the present techniques do well and where they need improving. So can we develop some better methods that actually improve the state of the art in AI and machine learning? And one of the things that we feel is important is that industry, I was at Microsoft for 10 years, but there's Facebook, Google, Amazon, all these people, they have huge data sets, but the data sets they're using, and they're routinely using deep learning, they're not going to be made public anytime soon. They contain personal information about you and me and everybody else. And so they're not going to make them public. What we can do with our scientific data sets is we can offer a curated open data set that other people can use and download so they can compare with these data sets. So we think our curated open data sets is an important feature of this whole benchmark suite that we've been developing. And what we ultimately hope is that, there are estimates that all the data you take, they take petabytes of data now per year, and only a small percentage is actually ever used. Well, can we actually increase that percentage? Can we increase what Jim Gray used to call the velocity of scientific discovery? can we make it more efficient? And I think that's very important. And actually getting scientists to understand how these techniques could help, where they could help, and where they're not relevant, that's an important thing to do. So that's our goal. So where are we? Well, this is, if you look at GitHub, the address at the bottom, this is the release. This is our first release of what we're calling the SciML benchmarks. And you can find here a synopsis, the organization, the features, and so on, how you install it, etc. So there's a description there. And if you're interested, please go and have a look and talk to us. We're happy to talk. What have we done so far? Well, we've just released a few months ago version 1, and it's released with a framework. So what framework are you using? It has a benchmark, which is code written in Python for a particular algorithm, and it also has the curated data sets. And we've got 3 examples. One is a denoising example from electron microscopy data. I'll show you in a moment, and it's a 5 gigabyte data set. It isn't a huge data set. The other one is diffuse multiple scattering from X-rays at the synchrotron, the diamond synchrotron we have at the lab, and that's about a 9 gigabyte data set. And the last one is from an environmental area. It's from the Sentinel satellites, which are data stored on Jasmine, and it's SLSTR cloud. That tells you about a sensor, and I'll tell you about that later on. And we have 2 data sets, one something less than 200 gigabytes and one over 2 terabytes. And that's just examples. These may not end up as the final best. Any of these may not be the final best set we recommend, but there are sites that we can go and play with and see what the difficulties are in moving large data sets around and making the data sets accessible when they're significant size. And this is the challenge in this, one of the challenges we have here. So that's what we're looking at with our benchmark suite. We've released this and anybody can go and play with it right now. So what are these 3 benchmarks? As I said, diffuse multiple scattering, these are the sort of images, and we're trying to identify what are called triple intersections in these images. And it's a data set of 9 gigabytes with about 8,000 images. And the other one is removing noise, EM denoising one on the right, noise from electron microscopy images. It's a 5 gigabyte data set and has about 10,000 images. And the idea is, as you see, to remove noise to make them more relevant for scientific analysis. So this is before you get to doing the science analysis. And then the cloud masking one is identifying pixel by pixel basis of the images these satellites contain, measure as they go around the world about once every 24 hours or so, taking data. And can you identify each pixel? Is it cloud or non-cloud? And that's the challenge. Right, so what are the requirements? Well, this is what we're trying to achieve. It's not clear we've got there yet. First of all, we need to have recording and record accurately the application and computer parameters. That's obvious. We'd like our scientific application benchmarks to be representative of real applications. They may be slightly simpler or slightly reduced, but basically they need to have features of real applications, and that's important to us. And what we want to actually study is, for a given application and a given architecture, is there some feature that makes it better to use this algorithm rather than this algorithm, or what are the challenges you have to tune to get things running at the optimum speed. And from our purpose as computer scientists, understanding parallelization and scalability, understanding also how where the bottlenecks are, can we actually understand and do a detailed breakdown of the code, profile it, and see where we're getting unexpected behavior. And I'll show you some examples. And it has to be easy to deploy and run. And I was working with Jack Dongara, who most of you will know, on a thing we call the Genesis benchmarks. And we wrote a nice paper together about how it was you needed more than one more than one number to characterize a parallel machine. And then came the Linpack benchmark. And that clearly has proved its worth over the last 20 odd years. So this is a quote from Jack: "Whatever we run should be simple to explain and implement." And I think that's important. And we can't ask people to do ridiculously difficult things, produce huge amounts of data. We have to be careful what we ask them to do. And yes, it may be more than one number, but it has to be very simple and easy to do. And I think that's extremely important, and we shouldn't forget that. So let me show you some specimen results. Some of them are obvious and some of them are not. But before we get there, I need to explain that if we're targeting physicists and scientists and biologists and so on, we need to explain to them the new world. And it's the new world post Moore's law, actually. Increasingly, in order to get more performance, you'll have to add accelerators to GPUs, is an example of one accelerator, to the CPUs. And that is new to many of the people who do computational simulation, who do experiments or whatever, do analysis. And we have actually to educate people, make it easy for them to do that. The features of a CPU are rather different from the features of a GPU, and we need to make it easy for them to be able to just pick up the code and run on these rather complex systems. And so can we do that? And the sort of things you come into, that there are really two worlds you have to worry about, because you have to copy data from the CPU to the GPU, the code kernel from the CPU to the GPU, you have to launch the kernel on the GPU, copy results back. It's complicated, and there are libraries and compiler annotations you can use can help you. So can you make the CPU, GPU worlds easier for novices to navigate? And that's one of the challenges, making the benchmarks easy to use in this world of accelerators. And that's important. And there'll be many different types of accelerators, and we'll look at a few of them. So this is something that's fairly obvious. Note this is a logarithmic scale. And so on the right, our local cluster we call SCARF, and this is one of the processors there is an Intel Xeon. And for that, we see runtime per epoch is about 400 seconds. And on the Summit Tesla V100, for example, or we have a DGX2, which we run a service called Pearl, and that's roughly 6 or 7 seconds as opposed to over 400. So it's a significant 70-fold increase in performance, going from a CPU only to this CPU GPU V100 system here. This is for the diffuse multiple scattering example, but there are other similar ones. So this is another parameter you can look at. This is looking at an early GPU, K80, which was a relatively cheap GPU, which we had on our SCARF cluster. And we also now have V100s there. And you can see that this is the average time per epoch again, and there's been a significant improvement, but it's not a log scale, and the improvement goes from 1600 to 400, so it's a 4-fold improvement. But if you look at the typical prices for K80s and V100s, you'll see actually it's much larger than that, and they're relatively expensive. So we need to understand what the trade-offs are, make sure we get good performance, but also good performance per dollar, I think is important. So these are some of the sort of basic things we started with, but let's look in detail at the cloud benchmark. Cloud masking, it's called. The code is SLSTR, cloud. SLSTR is the specific sensor that's on the Sentinel-3 satellite that goes around the Earth, and it stands for Sea and Land Surface Temperature Radiometer. So from that, you can determine, you want to be able to determine whether the individual pixels of these images contain cloud or clear sky. And again, the problem here is what's the ground truth? And there are a few data sets where people have carefully hand marked whether it's cloud or non-cloud, but these are very large data sets. And what we've done here is use the traditional sort of Bayesian guess that you start with, and gives you a sort of ground truth. Can we improve on that by using a neural network? And that's what we've been doing here, using a rather traditional neural network, the UNet neural network. And we've looked at it for the two data set sizes, 180 gigabytes and over 2 terabytes. We've looked at these, and there are a number of channels per pixel, as you can tell. So this is the Cloud Mouse bench chart, and this is the one we've studied at the moment most closely. So these are just some note. This is on the Perl DGX2 system we have at the lab, and you can see one of the anomalies here on processors 1 and 2. It's much faster on the 4 than you'd expect, and we're not quite clear why 534 and 517 on 1 and 2 are so close together and so large, and we'll come back to that. So we're looking into exactly where the bottlenecks are and what could cause this. Is it actually moving the data around within the GPUs and things like that? We need to understand that in more detail. On the right-hand side, over 100 epochs, we're showing that there's a training accuracy which rises up with get to 100 epochs. It's well over 90%. And the testing accuracy on the test set is over 90%, slightly less than the training accuracy. But what we see is that we can actually, in some cases, do significantly better than the Bayesian network. This is something you can also look at. This is the batch size for each epoch. You can divide it up into various size batches, and here we see that it doesn't really make much difference. But you can look at these. But again, you see the relatively slowness of the 1 and 2 compared to 4 and 8, which we don't understand. I'll come back to batch size in just a moment when we go to terabytes. So this is our terabytes, and here you see this is a log plot on the left here, and you go from 18,000 runtime per epoch instead of 500. That's fine. And you notice that going from 1 to 2 in this case goes down from 18,000 to 10,000, which is a significant reduction. And so whatever was happening on the smaller data set doesn't seem to be happening on the bigger data set. And also we looked at some of the batch size, and it seems on the batch size, when it gets too small, you get some sort of deadlock. And again, we'd like to understand exactly what's happening there. So this shows that there are some things that we need to understand about the benchmarks before we're really happy about the performance. But this is the numbers for the terabyte benchmarks. And this is what we're doing at Summit. This is a picture of Summit, Oak Ridge, and uses a lot of power, as you can see. It has 4,600 odd IBM Power 9s, and each of them have 6 NVIDIA V100s. So, you know, it's got tens of 20,000 odd GPUs. So it's a very big system, and is one of the fastest systems in the world for doing both computational modeling, simulation, but also for doing AI calculations. So we're not going to use anything like 1,000 GPUs, but this is the system we're running on. And of course, when we're running from the UK on the system in the US, there are some challenges, and this is what Yuri, who is the person who's been working hard on this, has been doing. First of all, he has to have an identity check, obviously, with an RSA key. You don't have root access on Summit, not surprisingly, so you can't use Docker containers, you have to use Singularity. But our Singularity container we built for use on Perl and V100s is involved with the x86 Xeon architecture, and we haven't got a Power 9 system at the moment at the lab. We have had, but we haven't one at the moment. And so what Yuri needed to do was find some way to build a container for the Power 9s, and with the help from the lab, they were extremely helpful at Oak Ridge, we managed to do that. There's a few other little problems when you're transferring 200 gigabytes. The disk quota you're allowed is only 50 gigabytes, and so you have to find somewhere else to store it, which he did. Data transfer nodes, transferring large data sets takes time, and you need these sort of science DMZs to actually get the data efficiently transferred to large sets of data efficiently transferred to other remote sites. And we also have a maximum quota time of 2 hours, but that isn't a problem with these particular data sets. So those are the challenges that we had working remotely on Summit, and these are the results. And for me, this is for the 180 gigabyte data set. And you can see it's a linear slide, and in the blue you see the Pearl ones, which are 1 and 2 are anomalously high in my view, and you see you don't see that in the Summit. And although it is again slightly surprising that 1 GPU is slower than is faster than 2 GPUs on Summit, but you can see that they're all otherwise consistent because they're all running on V100s. So we need to do some more understanding of that. But for us, it's at least a first step that we can run on different systems and move data around to get these data sets actually used by other people, make them available. And so we're hopeful now that we can go on and do much more. So what more are we going to do? Well, in the future, we have a bunch of other possible benchmarks in various stages of maturity. One of them, just to pick out one, is LIGO. This is the gravitational wave one, and they've been using machine learning. I mentioned optical damage, and then there's a couple of astronomy ones, Deep Halo and Photo Z. So there's a number of different areas where we have some interesting possible benchmarks where we're looking at. We're also working with what used to be called ML Perf, which is now ML Commons, and we have a science working group, and that's to be distinguished from the HPC working group, which is looking at traditional HPC benchmarking. We're looking at science. What's the benchmarks say and the machine learning algorithms say about the science applications. We're looking at helping scientists increase the efficiency of scientific discovery, and we have some scientific parameters like accuracy and so on that we're going to be measuring for our science benchmarks, rather than just the performance numbers. And again, just giving huge tables of performance numbers is not what we want. We need to have some simple, small numbers of things we measure which have significance. And that's remembering Jack Dongara's lesson, to keep things as simple and easy to use as possible. In the ML Commons Science Working Group, we're using our CloudMass benchmark, but we're also using UNO, which is one of the Candle benchmarks from Argonne, and STEM-DL, which is a benchmark they've been running in Oak Ridge. And so we're hoping to have a couple of benchmarks, UNO and STEM-DL, in our next release of the benchmarks. We also feel we need to add some additional support for training libraries for distributed training. Hollywood was one, but we also have other libraries we need to worry about. We also want more platforms, but the platforms they have available at Oak Ridge and Argonne. NVIDIA A100s are now available. And of course, there are a multitude of chip manufacturers, Cerebras, GraphCore, Grok, and so on, which we need to go and play with and make sure we've understood in terms of what they have to offer and how they can improve the performance, when they can improve performance, and when is it worth doing to get the science out. Again, we have some interest ourselves in understanding how the architecture is causing a few little anomalies. Code profiling, looking at inter-GPU communications are some of the things we're looking at the moment, but we believe we can get to the bottom of that and understand in some detail how these actually benchmarks run and where they have challenges. And also we have, as we learned with the Power 9s, we have to develop containers for various different architectures, and how we do that, and how easy is it going to be to do that. So we have a number of basic things to do, but we believe these are all feasible, and we're making progress on them, and we're making progress on the benchmarks. As I said, those 3 initial benchmarks may not be the benchmarks that we finally decide are the most useful, but they are at the moment the most useful for debugging and making sure we understand how to do these on different platforms. And so we welcome any help on that, and you're invited to join us, to join the ML Commons working group, whatever you want. But you can certainly go and look at the benchmarks and the data sets on the GitHub website I mentioned earlier. But at the end of the day, what we believe is summarized by this: AI won't replace the scientists, but scientists who use AI will replace those who don't. And actually, people who understand what AI can do and what it can't do, what machine learning can do and can't do, they're the scientists who will actually succeed and get more science, more scientific discoveries and efficiency. So we think this is a worthwhile thing for us to focus on, looking at the application of machine learning to scientific applications, which will help improve our understanding of machine learning algorithms and also improve the science that we can get out of these huge data sets that are now being generated by the facilities. And that quote was given to me by David Womble, and it came from a Microsoft report, curiously enough. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that the talk was of some interest. Thank you.